Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking college football. Mountain West action it's in full effect now as every team is well within conference play, and we got some conference games under everybody's belt now as San Jose State and Wyoming will battle it out this Saturday afternoon into the evening out in Laramie as San Jose State and Wyoming. Well, both teams that, were San Jose State off to a little bit of a slower start. Wyoming, just right around the 500 mark. And now they're going to go at it 7,000 feet above sea level. Should be a good one. And we got ourselves another guest on the podcast to talk Spartans and Cowboys as he's the University of Wyoming beat writer for YO Sports, and he's a Heisman Trophy and AP Top 25 voter as well. Alex Taylor. Alex, thanks for taking some time out of your busy day to talk Spartans and Cowboys.
Yeah, for sure, Nick. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. So, look, SJSU and Wyoming played, last year out in San Jose, and now we get the game, back up in sea level or way above sea level, that is. But this is an all-time series. I mean, dead even 7-7, and it's pretty remarkable that this is a long lasting series, but this is only going to be the 15th all-time matchup. I've found that kind of hard to believe, but San Jose State's won 3 straight against the Pokes, 6 of the last 7. Walker Egan made his first career start against Wyoming. I know you were out there out in San Jose last year, and that was a tough one for Wyoming, but a little bit of changes here at the quarterback. The skill position has relatively stayed the same, just overall from that game way back when last year in San Jose. I guess, has there been much change from that game that most recently passed?
Yeah, I think looking back to San Jose State last year, that was kind of the initial emergence of Caden Anderson as Wyoming's quarterback. He actually came in to that game. I think it was a little too late, but he came in and I think he threw a 63-yard touchdown pass to John Michael Gillenborg there at the end of the game. So that was kind of the first glimpse that Wyoming fans got of Evan Svoboda being benched that season, and then obviously that kind of started a dual or a 2 quarterback system for the next couple of weeks, and then Caden Anderson just became the starter there against New Mexico a couple weeks later. So that was definitely a poor showing by Wyoming's offense. That's kind of become a theme here with this Wyoming team since that San Jose State game. I mean, Caden Anderson's obviously started every game this year at quarterback for Wyoming, and it's going to be him again against San Jose State on Saturday night. So this is kind of another test coming off that loss against UNLV to see where Wyoming's offense kind of measures up against a San Jose State defense that looks a little susceptible to the pass.
Yeah, I would most certainly agree. They were a little bit better against the ground last week versus New Mexico. With the Lobo ground attack, that's definitely been impressive. But yeah, I'm with you. They've definitely been vulnerable through the air. They let New Mexico's top pass catcher have a career day, north of 140 yards and 11 catches with the touchdown. San Jose State is what had a lot of preseason expectations, picked 3rd in the polls, off to the slow start, but I think from the fan base out here, and I think just Mountain West media as a whole, I think they're kind of in the form now where I think a lot of people expected them to be in week 1. Walker Egan's coming off his Mountain West Player of the Week, his first of his career, extremely efficient last week, 26 for 30, 327 passing yards. This is kind of like a Spartan offense right now where, they're firing on all cylinders, but that defense, is more than capable of giving up some points in their own right. So, this almost seems like a get right game in a sense for Wyoming, but, they've definitely been on the struggle bus themselves. I know they got that tough loss last week versus UNLV where, UNLV had a very bad track record, out there in War Memorial Stadium. I guess I know special teams were a big part of the problem last week, but just overall, a 2 touchdown loss, for Wyoming. What went wrong beyond the special teams there?
Well, I mean, it's hard to track away from the special teams when you look at they lost by 14, and obviously they gave up 2 touchdowns on special teams. But really, offensively, I mean, they had plenty of chances to get back into this game. I mean, they had a touchdown called back that would have brought them. It would have been 24-17 with a couple minutes left in the third quarter, and that really hurt them. The touchdown gets called back, and then Caden Anderson, the next play, throws an interception right at like the 5-yard line on a bad adjustment on the offensive line. So it was really, I mean, it kind of backs up what happened on special teams, but they just continued to kind of hurt themselves and take themselves out of that game. And the defense, like Jay Sauvel said after the game, like the defense played well enough to win that game. But when you give up 2 touchdowns on special teams on two, and really they could have blocked 4 punts the whole night. I mean, you can say the weather wasn't great, but I mean, UNLV was playing in the same conditions. So I think offensively, you kind of just see they have this tendency to come out of the first half, and they're one of the worst teams in the country in scoring. They're averaging like less than 3 points a game in the first half. And then they come out in the second half, they put together a 5-play, 75-yard scoring drive, and you're kind of – I don't blame the fans. The fans are kind of sitting there like, where has this been? Why can't we see this more consistently? And obviously that's a big question for Jay Sauvel and his coaching staff right now is how do we replicate this in the first half so we're not going into the locker room down 24-3 in a conference game. And obviously historically Wyoming's offense isn't built around coming back from down 21 points at a half. It's just not that pace of play, I guess. So I'm curious with San Jose. Obviously, you kind of mentioned the early struggles this season. I mean, I ranked them pretty high in the preseason poll. I think they were picked 3rd, and there was a lot of expectations on this team. And I'm curious how Wyoming's defense is able to limit the damage of Walker Egate's throwing ability because they haven't really. They got aired out against Colorado, and that was really their one bad showing this year against a passing offense. And obviously UNLV wasn't able to do much offensively. So I'm curious. This is a really good measuring stick game for Wyoming on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and for SJSU, they kind of get to take their talents on the road here. A lot of guys haven't really been in this environment. I mean, because last time SJSU was out here was 2022 when they had Chevin Cordero at quarterback, and you guys had Andrew Peasley at quarterback, who's, I have to say, he's still like one of my favorite Mountain West quarterbacks just because fourth quarter I knew that if he was down a score he was gonna toughen his way to the end zone. So man, that guy was always a fun watch every week. But it's been a long time since the Spartans have been out there, over 3 years now, and this is kind of a different environment. I asked Coach Kenny Amontalolo about it. He's like, I've been in this profession so long. I'm not changing anything. It's some altitude. Yeah. It might be a little cold over there, for us California kids, but we don't need to change the game planning strategy as far as preparation is concerned. You mentioned as far as Wyoming, just Caden Anderson, he's had last week he had the 254 yards, the 1 touchdown, the 1 interception versus UNLV. You mentioned it, with him, it was that game in San Jose last year was kind of, the transition into him, being QB1. He showed lots of flash in that game last year versus New Mexico. And, you're thinking all of a sudden like, wow, this guy's got something here. He's got Chris Durr Jr. at wide receiver, John Michael Gillenborg. I talked to him at Mountain West Media Days. He's one heck of a talent and just a great kid off the field. What's the deal with them? Because I know they've been dealing with some injuries. I know John Michael was out last week, and the wide receiver position and, just the skill position over there is, a little thin without those guys, right?
Yeah, I think Chris Durr Jr. We'll have to wait and see. I think the initial injury report will come out tonight, but it sounded like he was questionable. He had some kind of upper body injury against UNLV, so that would obviously be a big loss. And then John Michael Gillenborg hasn't played in 10 quarters with a thigh injury that he had against Utah. So it didn't sound. Jay Salville didn't sound super confident that he would play, but I guess it was a shock that he didn't play against UNLV because after that Colorado game, Salville had kind of said if we didn't have a bye next week, he would be playing. And then so he suffered some kind of setback, and obviously we don't know how significant that was. But yeah, you're right. Behind those two, I mean, those two are Wyoming's leading receivers, and Gilmore only has 8 catches, and that kind of says a lot of kind of the lack of production that Wyoming is getting out of their passing game. And I'm not blaming that position specifically. It's just like Chris Durr has 25 catches, and then the next best receiver is John Michael Gillenborg with 8, and that's a difference of 17, and he's missed the last 2.5 games. And you look at really like Caden Anderson's delivery has been off. I'd say like he's just not really been on the mark. He's 116th in the country out of 123 qualifying quarterbacks at about a 55% completion percentage, and that's Wyoming fans are kind of seeing a very similar thing play out that they did last year with Evan Svoboda, and I don't know if they want to go through that again. But then also you look at just their depth chart. I don't know what the option would be going forward. So again, the patience is kind of running out within Wyoming's fan base. I'd say it's been consistently pretty poor quarterback play since Josh Allen, and you're kind of waiting to see when or if they can kind of break through that and establish this new passing identity that they haven't had.
Yeah, and obviously, that backfield with Sam Scott and Samuel Harris, they're so heavily reliant, just because of with the Durr and Gillenborg injuries. I mean, is this one of those games like for Wyoming, like they definitely got to control, play, keep away, truncate the game, have those 7-8 minute drives, and really rely on things because SJSU outside of the game versus New Mexico, they have been a little bit vulnerable through the ground. I know Anderson not known for his mobilities, doesn't really extend plays through that regard. That's kind of challenged them, the mobile quarterback. So is this kind of like, hey, we got to rely on Jack Walsh and Caden Barnett and Sam Scott and Samuel Harris to really go to work and push the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth between that because I really think I think they want to see more out of Caden Anderson, and I would be surprised if they just went away from him completely, which obviously isn't possible, I guess, in the game of football. But you look at like the most disappointing part of Wyoming's offense right now is they're 10th in the Mountain West in rushing offense, which is just not a formula for success for a Wyoming team. And so, yeah, I think you'll see Sam Scott more. He was kind of their spark in the second half to get them back into that game against UNLV. And Samuel Harris, obviously, he was Mountain West Freshman of the Week back-to-back weeks earlier this year, and you kind of see why with the explosiveness. And they're two different backs. I mean, obviously, they have different skill sets, which kind of complement each other. But I do think this is, again, I think it's also an opportunity for them to maybe try and build Caden Anderson's confidence up with some in the quick passing, but not necessarily maybe like the deep ball, but just against a San Jose State defense that does give up passing yards. I'd be surprised if they don't try to exploit that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they come out and just try to establish, the run game immediately and then control the time of possession, which they have not been doing on these last 3 games.
Yeah, and for SJSU, I know a lot of people, out here in the Bay Area have just been preaching for a more balanced attack, within the air and through the ground. This was last week versus New Mexico was kind of the first time we've seen that in the Ken Niumatalolo era where they're able to finish a game with the one score lead, just moving the sticks with their ground game. I know Walker Egan's not known for his running, but he kind of he kind of pulled the plug and took off for himself for a first down. They've been having this just craziness at the running back position, with Floyd Chalk, not on the depth chart anymore. Now having to rely on a freshman and Steve Chavez Soto, who kind of just came out of nowhere and led the team in rushing last week. They got Lamar Radcliffe now as a sophomore, who's really kind of a bruiser running back. So they got some options there, but it's definitely not the personnel that everyone thought in week one per se. They're dealing with that. The offensive line, has definitely been strong, and Danny Scudero at wide receiver. I mean, he's leading the country in receiving yards. I guess we should go there with this Cowboys defense and in regards to who's going to keep Scudero in check, because outside of the Texas Longhorn defense, no one's been able to really do it. I know the Pokes front seven is very feisty, and they've always been feisty. I like Braden Johnson, the linebacker. Andrew Johnson, the safety's been rock solid. I mean, who in your eyes is gonna have to maintain Scudero here at wide receiver for SJSU? And just, is there any players that you're circling here in this particular matchup, to really step up here?
I would imagine Tyrese Boss is probably the number one option at cornerback to be kind of handling that assignment, but I also think it could be a team approach of having I don't know if they rotate guys based on what side of the field they're on, or if it's matchup based, but I think Tyrese Boss is their best. He's playing the best at cornerback right now, and I really think the key, when you have one receiver that's as good as San Jose State has, I mean, I think the focus is going to be defensively to get to the quarterback and get to Walker Egan and make him uncomfortable, and they were very good about that early on in the year. I mean, Akron's Ben Finley had a really, really bad game in Akron in the season opener, and a lot of that came with some halftime adjustments with getting to the quarterback, getting him uncomfortable so he doesn't have forever to sit there and throw. And like you said with Walker Egan, I mean, not necessarily known for his legs, and that's been kind of the Achilles heel of Wyoming's defense so far this year, is just letting quarterbacks escape the pocket and then hurt them down the field with a pass, or obviously with Devin Dampierre, again, with Utah's Devin Dampierre being able to use his legs to pick up big yardage. So I think just in terms of the passing defense, I mean, they've been pretty, outside of that Colorado game against Caden Salter, they've been pretty respectable in the passing defense. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be really their first true test in conference play of, this guy's a target machine. I mean, do you let him? He's going to hurt you at some point in the game. It's just going to be limiting that damage and obviously not allowing those small chip plays to kind of turn into those longer, explosive 30, 40, 50-yard gains, which has kind of happened at times.
So as far as this game is concerned, obviously you can't have any special teams breakdowns, but I mean, is there one thing like you're trying to pinpoint here as far as the keys to the game, for the Cowboys here? Is it, a little bit, Caden Anderson trying to, move the sticks with his arm? Is it a little bit more of the ground game, maybe a little bit of both? Or what would you say is the key here, for Wyoming to get up on top? Because the way I see it is that they're gonna have to slow this game down a little bit. Obviously, I don't think this Wyoming team is built for a track meet, but we see, and you see it every single week that weird stuff happens in Laramie, and these games kind of, if they're a one-score game in the third, fourth quarter, I mean, it doesn't matter who they're playing. All bets are off. Weird stuff happens.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing I go to is obviously turnovers is obvious, but I think specifically Caden Anderson's ability to take take care of the ball. I mean, he's lost 3 fumbles this year. I mean, obviously the first one he got hurt, so that's kind of an understandable situation to lose the ball in. But he's had 6 turnovers, 3 interceptions, and 3 lost fumbles this year, and 2 of those came against UNLV, and those are drive killers, obviously. But it's the place on the field where some of these turnovers are taking place. Sam Harris had lost a fumble. I think it was in the red zone against UNLV, which killed obviously all the momentum they had. So I think if you're to stay in this game, like you said, I mean, you got to keep San Jose State's offense off the field, number one, and by doing that, you're going to have to keep secure the ball, and that hasn't historically been, since I've been here, a problem for Wyoming, but it's becoming a problem this season with some costly turnovers, and a lot of that is, I'm not saying on the offensive line, but Caden Anderson feels pressured and feels like he has to make this throw, and it's obviously not the right read, and the ball's going the other way. So I think when you talk about keys to the game, it's going to be Caden Anderson understanding how to take the safe play, take the guaranteed yards, and keep the ball in his own hand.
There you have it. Thanks for Alex Taylor from YO Sports for coming on to talk Spartans and Cowboys this Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. local out there in Laramie, Wyoming. This is obviously a big one for both sides. SJSU 1-0 in league play, trying to get back to 500 overall after a slow start to the season. I mean, this is one that you absolutely have to get against a struggling Wyoming Cowboy offense. I mentioned it to Alex, during our conversation there. Keep an eye on the injury report. This is obviously they're missing some key components within that offense. Wide receiver Chris Durr Jr., who absolutely tore it up week 1 versus Akron, has slowed down a little bit, but still, without a doubt, their best wide receiver one-on-one out there in coverage. And then, John Michael Gillenborg. I mean, the tight end, the guy that kind of does it all for him. We talked about Mountain West Media Day. He does so much for them within the ground game blocking. And then, just pass catching wise, this is a guy that had nearly 140 receiving yards last year in San Jose. Like, that's how important he is. And I think, this is just a big one for the Cowboys overall. I mean, Vegas views this game as a coin flip. Which I would say is a little bit surprising. That might just have to do with, San Jose, going on the road, and, people probably think Wyoming is due for a win, but, still, this is one that you have to take care of. If you can get off to a fast start like you did 3 years ago out there in War Memorial Stadium, have that 14, 17-point cushion for SJSU. This could be one of those games where they completely control and go within their ground game. But, we already know Wyoming, it doesn't matter how good or bad their offense looks, they're going to always bring it defensively. So I'm very curious, in the first half of this game, does the Spartans on the first couple drives, do they get a light box? And I think that will dictate the way things go from there, because New Mexico gave them a light box last week. And what did they do? They ran the ball. Steve Chavez Soto, the freshman running back, he went out and did some work. The Lamar Radcliffe, the sophomore, let's go Bruce for some extra yards. So, SJSU's got this dynamic ground game going. And, of course, the air raid with the spread and shred, where they could beat you in more than one way. And we really haven't seen that under Coach Ken, quite honestly, since he's arrived in San Jose and with Craig Stutzman as the offensive coordinator. So this could be going down the stretch here, not down the stretch because we still got a lot of meat to the season here. But this could be one of the toughest offenses to guard right now, especially with the way Walker Eagle's playing and hasn't had a turnover since the opening drive versus Idaho. The defense, we'll see how they play. Can they have a bounce back performance? But, this is going to all determine on whether those guys play, of course. So, there's still some things up in the air, but, if you're SJSU here, you got to get you got to get a W on the board for them, because we said it during the preseason, and, maybe things have changed now with the way San Diego State has rised up on the Mountain West power rankings and what you have in the season finale versus Fresno and them being on a heater themselves. But I still believe this is one of the tougher stretches that you're going to have through all of league play. I mean, at Wyoming, and then, 6 days later at Utah State, that's a very tough stretch. And you see the way that Utah State team is playing right now. I had 1-1 chalked up at the end of, when we were looking at the preseason stuff, maybe things change, but, this is a tough stretch, and we're going to see how this group handles the altitude out there, for SJSU. But right now, this is a team that is, looks good from an offensive standpoint. Some things to clean up defensively. We'll see if they do so this Saturday. So we got ourselves a whole lot coming. We got some first time guests coming on next week. Very excited to roll that out. Of course, we're going to have a San Jose State, Wyoming, little post game reaction come early next week. Break down all the other Mountain West action and, all the top 25 high profile games as well. We'll get into our San Jose State, Utah State game preview. So a whole lot of good stuff coming out here on the podcast, on the channel. So like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate all the feedback from everybody. And, appreciate all the support and love. That will do it for this episode of the Sports Sentiment. I'm your host, Nick Urias, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.